One of the things that we've done a lot of around here is answering questions from the religious. We've also tried some variations just to mix things up, but it's always going to have a special place in my heart to just say, here's my answers. What are you going to do about it? So what happens on the other side? Do the religious do the same thing? Well, apparently so. So let's go take a look at Mike Winger. I mean, why the hell not, right? Because this time, Mike is doing what we do around here a lot, answering questions. Unfortunately, he's botching it pretty badly. Now, I get that he's doing this from his own perspective, just like I do, but that doesn't really matter when your perspective is so fundamentally skewed that it doesn't make any sense at all. But okay, we'll take a look and give it a shot. So, can Mike Winger come up with any decent answers, or are we just going to laugh all the way to the end? I know what I think, but let's find out.
I was challenged by my friend Tim Barnett from the YouTube channel Red Pin Logic to answer in 3 minutes or less 10 atheist objections to belief in God. In fact, this comes from a YouTube comment from an atheist named Brian Doyle, who says that this is 10 ways to prove that a God does not exist. You know it's an atheist because he puts God in lowercase g unnecessarily just to get you.
Hey, it's not our fault that you people have zero creativity when it comes to naming your imaginary friends. So I just let him run on there for a minute just to get this set up. Now, I'm going to go back and kind of pick this apart a little bit. Firstly, Red Pen Logic is a crap channel. Tim Barnett is every bit as much of an idiot as Mike Winger is. We've taken him apart several times already. Granted, as I said, Mike Winger is an idiot too, so I guess that when stupid people hang out together, you've just got more stupidity. There is that. Secondly, we've done some 10 questions for atheist videos, and I even tried a 10 questions for Christians kind of thing. So now we're going to do a Christian answering 10 questions for Christians and rip the whole thing apart because it's probably fun. Why the hell not? It could be entertaining. So anyway, let's get back to Mike.
So I accepted Tim's challenge to try to, in 3 minutes or less, do this. He's going to do it on his channel as well. Here's my attempt to defuse the atheist bomb in 3 minutes. 10 reasons that you would stop being a believer in God. Let's see if I can do this and keep us all from becoming atheists in the next 3 minutes. Because I'm pretty sure if I can't answer these things in 3 minutes or less, the atheist bomb will blow up and we will all become atheists.
I don't really know that this needs to be a challenge. I mean, you do you and all that, but how does making it timed make it any better? Granted, he did take this 3-minute challenge and turn it into a 6-minute and 17-second video, so it certainly isn't going to save us any time, but I'm not really going to hold him accountable to the clock in the upper corner. I'd much rather just see some coherent, rational answers than watch him trying to beat a timer. That said, though, we'll let him do his shtick, and then I'll jump in when I think it's worthwhile. Get your stopwatches ready, and let's begin.
And to read the objections, allow me to introduce my improvisational atheist friend, Mick. 10 ways to prove that a God does not exist. Let's get started.
Yes, please, let's get started. Maybe we can just refer to you as Dick Wingnut or something, I don't know. But once again, let's actually get to the questions so we can get into the meat of this video. Just start the clock and go for it, Dick.
Number 1. The fact that a human being has to tell you about the existence of your God proves there is no God. We would be born with knowledge of its existence.
Now, I figure I might as well just answer the questions myself before I let Mike go and do his thing, so let's go ahead and do that. I don't know that I would have put it that way had I been the one asking the question, but I suppose it is a fair point. How does anyone come to any knowledge of any gods without humans coming up with the idea first? You have books written by humans and churches created by humans, staffed by humans, who are pushing this narrative. If you were born and grew up on a deserted island with no other humans around, and I do get the problems with that, but let's go with it for the moment, then the chances that you'd come up with a specific God or a specific religion are minimal at best. The chances that you'd come up with the Christian God are, well, they're infinitesimally small. That does suggest that specific gods, at least, require humans to keep the ball rolling. That you can't really come to a belief or to believe in a specific God by just observing the world around you without having other people tell you about it. So, how'd you get to Jesus from a world without a Bible? I have no idea whatsoever. But let's see what Mike has to say.
Babies aren't born knowing anything at all. How strange to suppose they will be born knowing about God.
Actually, they know plenty of things innately. They know that if they cry, they get attention. It's something that all babies do, and they understand that it works. Now, what I figure that Mike is about to do here is to get hung up on the baby part and ignore the whole gods require people to pass on the stories part. Why? Because I don't think he has a good answer to that, and we've seen apologists take off with the goalposts when they can't actually address the question that's being asked. So let's see if I'm right on this one, because it seems pretty obvious to me.
But research has shown that humans are predisposed to believe in supernatural agency behind the world. God belief will crop up in humans unless indoctrination pushes it out. So by your own standard, Brian, this is actually evidence for God.
Except that was not the question that was asked.
The fact that a human being has to tell you about the existence of your God proves there is no God.
See? It's your God, not a God, not any God, not a generalized God concept, your specific God. And he can't answer that one, so he just avoids it. He argues that people are predisposed to believe in some kind of supernatural something, which may or may not be true. But in order to come up with a specific belief in a specific God, that requires people to teach you about that God. So he's just wrong. And I think he understands that he's wrong. He just doesn't want to admit it in front of his paying customers. So he screwed that one up. Let's see what's coming next.
Number 2, a God belief is simply geography. Being raised in a religious home decides which God you believe in.
And this is demonstrably true. You can't find a single case where someone believed in a specific God that they were never, ever, ever exposed to. You want to know how we know that? Well, the existence of missionaries. If people could believe in your God without any prior exposure whatsoever, then why would you need to send missionaries to convert them? Why do we have no examples of a missionary just pulling up to a South Sea island and leaving because the natives already worship Jesus? Somebody has to tell you about Jesus first. So he's going to lose this one too. But let's hear it from his own lips.
What surprises me with this one is that it's based on an official logical fallacy called the genetic fallacy. Basically, you can't prove a belief wrong by criticizing where it came from, Richard Dawkins.
That wasn't even part of the question. The statement was, if you're going to believe in God X, you are going to have to be raised in a place where belief in God X is found. If God X belief is entirely unknown where you're born, and you never have any access to any information about God X, then you're not going to believe it until it is introduced in some way. So he's just being dishonest, which I suppose isn't much of a surprise. He is not answering the statements as given. He's reading into them so he can get back to a standard theological script. He's trying to get home to where he's comfortable. But that just isn't what's being proposed, though.
What's equally embarrassing for those who hold to number 2 is that by their own standard, their atheism is just a result of where they were born, and therefore they can't be trusted about atheism. So it's fallacious and self-refuting.
Except that's also not true. Atheism is the lack of belief in gods. I know the religious don't like that, but too bad. If you are never introduced to the concept of gods, you are, by default, an atheist. I know he doesn't like that. I mean, most theists don't, but that is what's actually going on. Now, I'm sure that he would argue that fact because he just can't accept that's what atheism is. Most believers can't. They have to cast it as a positive belief in the non-existence of gods because everyone has to be just like they are. Except we're not. So the only thing here is he's an idiot and a lying sack of shit. Big surprise there.
Number 3. There was no time before the Big Bang, so that means that there was no time for a God to exist or create things in.
Maybe? I don't know. The thing is, we can't really say what happened before the Big Bang because we have absolutely no idea what might have been true prior to Planck time. The only thing that we can actually say is that we don't know. However, I think it is an interesting question if we do assume a few things that are commonly found among the religious. Most of these people assume, probably wrongly, that our current physical whatever is the only physical whatever that has ever been. When you see them making arguments about causality, for instance, they assume that causality has always been so there. Therefore, if time is the only time that has ever existed, which of course we don't know, but if we're going to assume that it is, then the statement has a point. If there was no time before the creative act, then God couldn't have done anything, including create things, because nothing could be done in the absence of time. And of course, the religious will just make stuff up. Well, God can do anything. Okay, but that's just your claim. You have to be able to back that up, and good luck on that. You're going to need it. We know that our particular instantiation of space-time prior to the Big Bang, there wasn't time because there wasn't much of anything except a singularity. At least not time as we currently know it because we don't really know anything, but we're just going to go with it. So how did God do anything? I don't know. You tell me, and make sure you have evidence to back it up.
Now, this objection actually touches on a powerful reason to believe in God. Since the universe is space, time, matter, and energy, then the thing that made the universe needs to be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and incredibly powerful.
And that's bullshit. That's just a claim that you're making because it really appeals to you, but you have absolutely no means whatsoever to back any of it up. It depends on the assumption that anything created us in the first place. Just because you believe it, that doesn't make it true. This is where all these people go so entirely wrong because they're just assuming that they are right without ever proving that they are right, without ever providing any evidence that they are right, without showing how they got there in the first place. I don't care what you believe. I care if you can show that what you believe is actually so. When these people say, well, that sounds an awful lot like what I call God, that means nothing. It sounds like something you made up in your head, sure. Prove that that thing is real. If I can say, well, that sounds an awful lot like what I call invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies, are you going to believe me? I certainly hope not, because that's stupid. I don't care what it sounds like to you or if it feels good to you. I care that you can prove that the thing in your head has any actual existence in the outside world. And they can't do that, can they?
The timeless nature of the origin of all things is another piece of evidence for God.
No, it's evidence for your delusion. You haven't shown that these things exist anywhere but inside your overactive noggin. That's not going to impress anyone, and it shouldn't. It's why, well, my book says a thing doesn't mean anything either. Lots of books say lots of things. Just because you have an inordinate attraction to that book of mythology for emotional reasons, that doesn't make any of it true. That's where you have to prove your book is true, and these people can't do it. And I figure this is why Mike and his buddy over at Red Pen Logic aren't responding to the guy who sent the questions directly. They are not directly addressing their detractor because I think they know that they'd lose. And this reminds me of another video that I came across where Deconverted Man had already responded, but the video maker said something about, well, you know that this video was made for believers, as though that means anything. Well, of course it was, because you don't care about the truth. You are only looking for something that already appeals to people who are already convinced that it's so. They don't want to talk about it with people who are just going to ask all the hard questions and not be satisfied with, but I really, really believe. And that makes all of this just dumb.
Number 4. The Abrahamic God cannot exist because it wasn't the first God to be created. There are other gods that have been proclaimed to exist before this God. They can't all be true, so if we can deny the existence of one of these gods, we can use the same method to deny them all.
To be fair, that doesn't really mean anything at all. It wasn't the first God that anybody ever dreamed up, but that doesn't mean that at some point in time, it wasn't discovered to be true. That's like saying that the germ theory of disease can't be true because it wasn't the first idea that anybody came up with. I will agree that this isn't a great statement. Let's get on to Mike. It might be the only place we actually agree.
This one is seriously confused. It assumes that God was created when Abraham existed, but that assumes atheism to prove atheism.
No it doesn't. Even when it's a simple matter to dispose of this, and I pointed out how, he still gets it wrong. What he's really doing here is getting upset because somebody suggested that his God was just made up. Yeah, basically, but that's not the problem with the statement. Mike believes that all other gods are just made up. He really likes the idea of his. But really liking something, that doesn't mean anything, does it? What you like doesn't matter. What you take offense to doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is what is actually true and how you get to that point rationally. The original statement, therefore, was malformed. We can't actually reject other gods because they weren't first, or because they weren't believed in widely. We reject all gods because there's no evidence that any of them are real. If, and that's a pretty big if, but if somebody came up with verifiable evidence for the Christian God, then the Christian God would be real. If somebody came up with verifiable evidence for the flying spaghetti monster, then the flying spaghetti monster would be real. What you want to be true doesn't matter. What you have demonstrable evidence for does.
Then it says that if all gods aren't real, then no God is real. That's like saying fake Van Goghs prove there are no real Van Goghs.
That's not what he said, though. He started off with, because it isn't the first one, it can't be real, which is false. Then he went to, we can reject all of them for the same reason, which I agree with. That reason is we don't have any damn evidence for it, but that doesn't prove that any of them are not true, only that we have no good reason to think that they are. And before the religious start thinking that grants them license to just believe in things that are unsupported, it doesn't. Just because we can't prove that aliens aren't molesting cows, that doesn't mean that they are. You still have to have a good reason to accept it, and whether Mike likes it or not, he simply doesn't.
Number 5. God either allows the devil to exist and is an accomplice, or it isn't an all-powerful God. An all-powerful and loving God wouldn't allow the devil to exist. Isaiah 45 verse 7, King James Version.
That's a very poor way to put it. The argument from evil, at least according to Epicurus, says this: is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? The problem with all of this, at least in my opinion, isn't with the existence of a God, but in the characteristics that the religious arbitrarily staple onto him. They're the ones who assigned all of the omni properties. There is no evidence at all that any real God actually has them, because we don't have any evidence of any real gods. Believers have simply said that he's got them, and have presented absolutely no methodology by which they could possibly know that. The entire problem goes away once you drop one or more of the omni properties. If you make God evil, then there's no problem with evil existing in the world. If you take away omnipotence, then God's inability to do away with evil is perfectly understandable. Of course, the religious happen to really like these omni properties, and that's why they stick with them, even though they make no sense. That's my take anyhow. It's on the religious to show that their God actually is the way that they describe him, but since they can't prove their God exists at all, and they can't prove any observations of their real existing God that would show these things to be reasonable, yeah, it's all just a load of BS. But anyway, let's see what Mike has to say.
Many reasonable explanations have been offered as to why God allows evil, and if they are even possibly true, then this objection fails, and that's why no scholars today promote this objection.
No. Just because something is possibly true, that doesn't prove that it's actually true. Is the important part here. Well, aliens could have a super secret faster than light drive, and maybe they just need to extract some rare element from people's buttholes. That's why they go for the anal probes. Yeah, but that doesn't prove that anything is actually going on, though. Just because you really want it to be true, that doesn't make it true. Mostly, at least in my experience, the religious simply refuse to talk about it because they just don't have any adequate answers, especially given the fact that most skeptics reject their blind faith claims out of hand. I don't care what you like. I care what is verifiably so. So his hand-wavium aside, he hasn't even addressed the question at all. Granted, he is on a timer, so I might possibly excuse it, but I've seen him talk about this while not under the gun, and he really does know better there. So let's keep going.
On Isaiah 45:7, where it says God created evil, I have a whole video on that linked in the description below.
I'm going to let that one pass, again, just because he's trying to beat the clock, so I'm trying to be a little bit charitable. However, I have seen his video on Isaiah, and I am not remotely impressed. Once again, as we always see, he's just assuming that his particular interpretation of the Bible is true, with zero evidence at all to back it up. Just because you really want it to be true, that doesn't mean a thing. This is a pretty standard religious trope that all religions pull because, well, they want to. I'm not sure why it's supposed to be impressive, because Mike doesn't believe it when Muslims try it, or when Hindus try it, or even when other versions of Christianity try it. Why? Because he just doesn't give a damn. Big surprise there. And I guess that's where we're going to stop for today. There's another couple of questions, but I don't want to have to rush, and I don't want this to turn into another 45-minute video, which it would if I just went straight through. Besides, too much Mike Winger in one sitting, that tends to be hazardous to your mental health. Therefore, we'll come back in a week when we've had enough time to clear out our systems, and we'll finish up. I'm pretty sure that it's not going to be any better from here. But hey, what do I know? Anyway, what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. Do you think that Mike Winger has made any good points at all? I think there have been a couple of places where he's kind of gotten within spitting distance of reasonable, right before he jumped off the cliff again. Because that's really what Mike Winger does. He's just not that smart. Let me know in the comments what you think, and give me a thumbs up if you agree. The religious make fools of themselves a lot, don't they? Oh, they think they're doing fine, but that's only because they can only see the world through a single, very Christian lens. And that's not how the world actually works, though, is it? But they don't actually care. They just really want to believe. And that makes them really, really stupid. So, let's get to it. We're back with part 2 of Mike Winger answering 10 questions in 3 minutes, and sadly, he's really not faring very well, is he? Oh, I'm sure he's going to hit the deadline. He wouldn't put up the video if he didn't, but his answers are leaving an awful lot to be desired. Some of that I will forgive because of the time crunch, but mostly it's just another example of dumb Christian apologetics, and we all know that Mike is excellent at that. It's not really something to be proud of, but there you go. Because Mike is really kind of dumb. So let's wrap this up and start right where we left off on question number 6.
Number 6. The God of the Bible is jealous of other gods. This proves that this God is not the only one. With multiple choices only shows that there is no reason to choose just one. If a God were true, there would be no other options.
I'm not even sure what to say to that. I mean, on some level, yes, that's true. In the Old Testament, there were clearly other gods, with the Jewish version just being their own local god that competed and supposedly won against all comers. There are places where you can make a pretty solid case that the Hebrews were just borrowing concepts and stories from the Egyptians and the Babylonians, places where sacred numbers for other religions were taken and used in the Bible, such as Genesis 50:22 and Genesis 41:30, etc., etc. Maybe the best example is in Exodus 7, where Moses and Aaron do miracles before the sorcerers of the Pharaoh, and they're able to do similar miracles powered by their own gods. And a lot of modern Christians have reinterpreted that as, the devil did it. But that is not the story that's being told. Very clearly, in the minds of the ancient Hebrews, their God was not the only God. Their beliefs evolved over time, which makes them very likely not factually correct. Because the reality here is that Yahweh didn't start out with the Hebrews. Yahweh was part of another pantheon first. And you can go look that one up for yourself because it's way too long to put in here anyway.
I don't even know where to begin with this one. First, if you're taking the Bible as true, which this objection depends on, then you realize that these other gods are at worst fake or at best demons and lesser spiritual beings, ontologically nothing like God Almighty.
No, that's just you spinning the Bible to fit your own narrative. I already described that, and I'm not at all surprised that's where he went. Clearly, in the Old Testament, that is not what was going on. Yahweh wound up being a Hebrew tribal god, and he wasn't even the only one. That's why, all the way through the creation story, it's, let us do this. By the time most of the Old Testament was written, they'd whittled their pantheon down to a single god, and Mike here is desperately trying to maintain his current beliefs instead of looking at what actually happened in the text. I guess you can't really expect honesty from these people, which is why I keep pointing out that they're not at all interested in the truth. They only care about getting to their emotionally comforting, wishful thinking. They just want to believe. And that's kind of sad, right?
And number 2, on God's jealousy, since the worship of false gods requires people to treat those gods as if they're real by sacrificing to false gods, going to temples, doing sexual rituals, God can be jealous for those people with or without those gods being real.
It's kind of silly though, isn't it? The whole idea of an all-powerful, omniproperty God being jealous of anything is really pretty stupid. That's another place where the religious just go off the rails. They believe that God is entirely self-sufficient, that he doesn't need anything, yet they can't explain why he would create the universe or make people specifically to bow down and kiss his ass. Because that is not self-sufficiency. They just gloss over all that part when you try to corner them because they've really got no good answers. Why would your God do what he's done in the way that he's done it, in the way that you describe him as being? Because that makes no sense. But they also have no idea, because that's not much of a surprise.
Number 3, you're literally taking a warning passage about worshiping false gods and using it as an excuse to reject the true God.
That's only because you assume that there is a true God in the first place. Back that up for us if you would. He's just assuming that he's right because he really wants to be right. But that doesn't make him right. You're using it to avoid worshiping the true God. You mean that thing you can't actually prove is real. You've got no more evidence for your God than anyone else has for theirs. Well, those are all false, and of course mine is true. Yeah, but that's not how that works. You actually have to have evidence to support it, and you've got nothing. If the ancient Egyptians were around today, they'd probably be saying the same thing about Mike that Mike is saying about them. Well, your God isn't real, but ours is. In fact, you don't even have to go back in time to see this. The Hindus, the modern day Hindus, they think Mike is wrong. Probably not specifically, they probably don't even know who the hell Mike Winger is, but they don't accept that the Christian God is real. What you claim doesn't matter. It's only what you can prove that does, and Mike, like all other Christian apologists, like all other apologists for every religion out there, you've got nothing. So let's get on to the next question.
Number 7. There is no evidence that spirit energy exists. So we can conclude that psychics, ghosts, and gods are non-existent. Otherwise, God has nothing to be made of.
I don't even know what spirit energy is supposed to be. I'm just going to take this as a general criticism of the supernatural. That's probably where it makes most sense. The religious have absolutely no clue what the supernatural is. I mean, go ahead and ask them. Don't tell me what it isn't. Tell me what it is, what it's made up of, how it operates. Anything about the supernatural, tell me what it is. Because they don't have a clue. The supernatural is just a placeholder for magic. It's just a made-up term to fill a blank spot in their heads where an actual explanation for their God is. But it doesn't actually have any meaning. They can't actually prove anything. And proving things is what it takes.
Christianity does not depend on the existence of spiritual energy any more than it depends on the existence of Santa's flying sleigh.
Yeah, but it does depend on the supernatural, which is pretty much the same thing. God did stuff, supposedly. Well, what were the actual mechanisms of those actions? What they're really describing here is magic, but they don't want to call it magic because they know just how dumb that sounds. So they just call it supernatural and hope that'll pass by unnoticed. It's all just a word game, though, just like he's trying to pull here. Oh, it's not spirit energy. That's silly. Except it's no sillier than what you're doing. It doesn't matter what you call your unsupported load of magical mumbo-jumbo. That's all it is until you can prove that it exists. And good luck on that.
God isn't made of something that is part of creation. If he was, it would actually be a good reason to reject belief in God in the Christian sense.
And how exactly do you know that? More importantly, how do you prove it? Anybody can say anything they want, but no matter how confidently they state it, that doesn't make it true. Well, invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies, they make things with unobservium. Well, what the fuck is unobservium? Nobody knows, but that's what they do, apparently, because I said so. Yet that's really dumb. Making things up in your head because it gets you where you want to go, that isn't rational, Mike. Knock it off.
Number 8. There is no such thing as nothing. For nothing to exist would cause it to be something. Creationists believe that God created the universe out of literally nothing.
Oh, I'm sure Mike won't like that, since I've seen him argue for the whole something from nothing nonsense plenty of times. It is true, however, that we have absolutely no idea what an actual nothing might look like, as no such thing seems to actually exist in reality. It's the religious who claim that their deities zippity-doo-dah'd everything out of literal nothingness, and they're just kind of projecting. Why do I get the sinking suspicion that Mike is going to make a reference to Lawrence Krauss? It just seems like something he'd do. Let's see if I'm right.
Oh, My, the only people I've actually heard say that nothing is something are atheists.
Because, so far as we know anyway, there is no such thing as nothing. There has never been any such thing as nothing. The only people I've ever heard saying that nothing created something are theists. I mean, it's a fundamental part of their apologetics after all. It's simple to back them into a corner on this. Well, what was here before God? Nothing. Okay. Then what does that make God? Duh. We don't have any use for the concept of nothing because that's all it is. A concept, just like your God. But anyway, go on, Mike. Just continue to show us just how dumb you are.
Like, look at physicist Lawrence Krauss, who likes to promote that view.
But they refuse to accept the idea that nothing might be a physical quantity.
See? What'd I tell you? Of course, it's clear that Mike has never read and certainly never understood Krauss's book because in it, Krauss very clearly explains that nothing isn't really nothing, at least not in the sense that Mike is trying to push. In fact, that clip that Mike cut short on purpose, I'm sure, shows exactly that. If nothing is a physical quantity, then it's not nothing, is it? In fact, Krauss said that the only reason he used the word nothing was to take a dig at Christians who've been pushing this nonsense forever. I do think that kind of backfired on him, but it isn't like these people are rationally considering what he said regardless, so it probably doesn't matter.
But since we agree that nothing's really nothing, the universe appearing from nothing is powerful evidence for a transcendent creator God.
When did we ever agree to that? Oh, right, he's just putting words in our mouths because he doesn't actually give a damn about the truth. He's only making videos for $1 on YouTube, going after people who already believe what he believes. Everybody has to be just like he is, right? We all have to agree with his absurd preconceptions, right? He's automatically right because he wants to be, right? Yet it doesn't actually work that way in reality, does it? This is why he's not sitting there with an atheist discussing these issues, because the atheist would just take him apart. Well, I'm just answering your questions. No, you're running around with the goalposts. You are trying to spin them in a way that supports your own personal narrative. You are not answering them in the spirit in which they were asked. And is anybody really surprised by that? Yeah, me neither.
Number 9. This is not a finely tuned world created with us in mind. The sun gives you cancer, most of the water's undrinkable, and diseases run rampant. If there was an intelligent designer, there wouldn't be any mistakes.
That's an excellent point. The planet does have a very narrow habitable zone, unless you take human technological progress into account. There are still places that it is almost impossible to live today unless you hide inside all the time and have all your food shipped in. The whole fine-tuning argument is utterly laughable, yet the religious persist in making it because they are emotionally attached to the idea that humans are just amazing. Everything was made just for us. Now, we could go back to Douglas Adams' puddle analogy, but I won't because we've seen it plenty. But this is just a failure in interpretation, not in fact. The fact is, we're here because the conditions were right for us to develop here. If the conditions had been different, then either whatever life had developed wouldn't have been us, or life wouldn't have developed at all, at which point there wouldn't have been anybody here to notice that there wasn't anybody here. And the religious don't like that, but not liking something doesn't make it not true. These people are just dumb.
That's like saying that cars aren't fine-tuned driving machines because they can cause car accidents.
But they were demonstrably made that way. You can't demonstrate anything of the sort about the universe. You can just assert it, as the religious do, just like pretty much everything else that Mike says. It's all just assertion and no evidence offered in support. I just really like the idea. But that doesn't mean anything, though. Liking the actual state of reality doesn't alter the actual state of reality. Not liking the actual state of reality doesn't alter the state of actual reality. It is what it is. Mike is an idiot.
Fine-tuning is present in the universe because the odds are astronomical that any intelligent life could exist without it being just the way it is.
Prove it. Because your definition of life is our life. Not any life, not any conceivable life, our life. We have one and only one example of life, which is what happened to evolve on this particular planet. That doesn't mean that that's all the life that ever could be anywhere. That doesn't mean that that's all life could ever be. There are plenty of hypothetical life forms that would never survive on an Earth-like planet, but that would do just fine under different conditions. It is impossible to say what the extent of possible life would even look like. Mike is still just being an idiot.
But fine-tuning doesn't mean perfectly safe and without dangers.
Fine-tuning seems to be whatever appeals to the religious in the moment. This is why we can't just let the religious run around with the goalposts all the time. Define your terms, back them up, and stick to that definition. Of course, if they did that, they'd just be revealed as the complete laughingstock that they actually are, because their entire game plan requires that they switch definitions on a dime. Well, atheists have faith. Well, okay, let's look at how your own book defines faith in Hebrews 11:1. Well, because they have to be dishonest if they hope to get anywhere, and Mike is one of the most dishonest out there.
Number 10. Evolution is obviously true. This means that we weren't created by magic and are somehow superior to the animal kingdom. No creator, no God.
That's not 100% true, because there have been tons of non-creator gods proposed out there somewhere. But I kind of get what he's saying. Evolution is demonstrably true. Anybody who says otherwise is either ignorant or stupid, or, looking at Mike, both. This isn't even a question anymore. It's just a bunch of ignorant, stupid, delusional people acting like immature children, stomping their feet and saying, "But we don't like it." Well, who cares? This is one place where they've just lost. And of course, they're just going to ride it down into oblivion.
Evolution, if you do accept it, is just another reason to believe in God. If an explosion can make all this through natural processes, then it was an explosion that was very highly specialized and engineered by an intelligence that wanted this to happen.
Oh, look, more empty claims based on blind faith and no evidence of any kind. Because, of course, that's all he's got. It's just another case of, well, I don't get it, therefore God, where God becomes the automatic answer to any question because he wants it to be. If you think about it, for the religiously gullible like Mike, God is already a foregone conclusion. He just has to twist reality to fit his preconceptions, not twist his preconceptions to fit reality. He doesn't actually care about reality at all. He only cares about his childish fifis. Therefore, God just has to be real, just because, and everything else can just be shaped to fit. Except that's not how things work, is it? Mike is a moron.
So that's how I did. Hopefully I defused those 10 issues, 10 proofs before the bomb blew up. I don't know. Maybe we're all atheists now.
Well, just based on your own performance, we all should be. I mean, this was just painfully bad. I think there was one question where I might have sort of agreed with him a little, but that was it. Everywhere else, he took things out of context. He took off down the field with the goalpost strapped to his back. He purposely misread the questions and went off on nonsensical tangents because he had nothing better to say. This is how religious apologetics works. Zero honesty, zero interest in the truth, just an attempt to maintain the faith, even if the faith is laughably nonsensical. Now, if anybody wants me to go over and do Red Pen Logic's version, let me know that in the comments. I've got no idea how he did because I've never watched it, but I kind of doubt that he'd be able to do any better. It's always a challenge to say who is dumber, Mike Winger or Tim Barnett. Let me know who gets your vote in the comments, and I'll catch you next time.